In the morning, my savings disappeared. My mother called to ask if I'd remember to send a birthday card to my aunt. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We need to talk." Just, had I remembered the card, I hadn't. I was too busy staring at a bank balance that should have read $34,000 and instead read $34,000 and instead read $214. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in my apartment in Columbus, still in the clothes I'd slept in, phone pressed against my ear, listening to my mother talk about postage stamps and whether I thought my aunt would prefer a floral design or something more modern. And I let her talk, because that was what I had always done. I let the people in my family fill the space with whatever they needed to fill it with, and I stayed quiet and I waited. I had been waiting my whole life, I think. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I work as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm, and for most of my adult life, I believed that being the steady, responsible one in my family was something to be proud of. I paid my bills on time. I kept my credit clean. I showed up to every holiday dinner with a dish to pass and a smile that never cracked, even when my brother walked in 2 hours late and my parents greeted him like he'd just returned from war. My brother's name is Derek. He's 4 years older than me, and my parents have been quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, rescuing him for as long as I can remember. A loan here, a cosign there, a second chance that became a third that became a fifth. He had a way of looking genuinely remorseful that I never quite mastered because I never needed to. I never asked for anything. That was my mistake. I understand that now. I grew up in a house in Dayton where love was distributed unevenly and everyone pretended not to notice. My father, Ronald, was the kind of man who expressed affection through criticism he called advice. My mother, Patricia, was softer but slippery. She had a gift for being in the room without ever quite being present. She remembered birthdays and forgot conversations. She asked how you were and started talking about herself before you could answer. Derek was their favorite. I knew it the way you know the temperature of a room when you walk into it. Not from anything said out loud, just from the air itself. He was charming and loud and always needed something, and my parents organized their energy around his needs the way a solar system organizes itself around its sun. I organized myself around the absence of that. By the time I was 23, I had moved to Columbus, started my job, and begun saving aggressively, not because I had big dreams of early retirement, but because I had understood, somewhere deep and unspoken, that no one was coming to help me if something went wrong. So I helped myself. I put away a little every month, then more as my salary grew. And by the time I was 29, I had just over $34,000 sitting in a savings account that I thought of as my floor. The thing that meant I would never have to call home and ask for anything. I want you to understand what that money meant to me. It wasn't a number. It was proof. It was the physical evidence that I had built something solid with my own hands, that I was not contingent on anyone else's goodwill. Every deposit I made into that account was a small act of self-preservation, a quiet declaration that I was going to be okay. My parents knew about the account because I had been raised to believe that family didn't keep secrets. I had mentioned it over dinner one Christmas, casually, the way you mention things you're proud of when you believe the people across the table from you want good things for you. My mother had smiled. My father had nodded. Derek had looked at his phone. 2 years later, my floor was gone. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday in March. I went to transfer money to cover a car repair. Nothing dramatic, a few $100s, and the app wouldn't load correctly. I figured it was a glitch. I tried again from my laptop. That was when I saw it. The account balance, the transaction history. There were 3 withdrawals, all made within a 10-day period 6 weeks earlier. The first was $11,000. The second was $12,500. The third was $9,800. Together, they had taken everything except the amount required to keep the account open, plus a little the withdrawals hadn't quite reached. $214? I sat there for a very long time. Then I called the bank. The customer service representative was apologetic but careful. She confirmed that the transactions had been made with proper authorization. She used that word twice, authorization, and the second time she said it, something cold moved through me. What kind of authorization? I asked. She said she wasn't able to share details over the phone and suggested I come into a branch in person with my ID. I drove to the branch in a state I can only describe as underwater. Everything looked normal outside the windows of my car. Traffic lights changing, people walking dogs, a woman pushing a stroller. I remember thinking that was strange, that the world was just going about its business while mine was collapsing inward. The branch manager was a man named Gary, who had kind eyes and the careful tone of someone who has delivered difficult news before. He pulled up my account. He looked at the screen for a moment longer than necessary before he turned to me. He asked if I was familiar with the power of attorney document on file for my account. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He turned the screen to show me. It was a limited power of attorney filed 14 months earlier, authorizing a named individual to make withdrawals on my behalf in the event that I was traveling or otherwise unavailable. It had been notarized. It had my signature on it. Except, I had never signed it. The name on the document was my mother's. I don't know how long I sat in that chair in Gary's office, not speaking. He was patient. He slid a box of tissues toward me at some point, and I looked at it like I didn't know what it was for. I want to be precise about what I was feeling in that moment, because it's important. It wasn't grief, exactly. And it wasn't rage, though both of those were in there somewhere underneath. What it was, the dominant thing, was recognition. The sick, clarifying sensation of finally seeing something that had been in front of you the whole time. Like when your eyes adjust to the dark and you realize the shapes you thought were furniture are actually people who have been standing there watching you. My mother had forged my signature. My mother had walked into a bank with a document I had never signed, filed it, and then waited, and then she had used it. I drove home and I sat in my apartment and I did not call anyone. I thought about calling my grandmother, my father's mother, Grandma Ruth, who was 78 and lived 40 minutes away in a senior living community in Westerville, and who was, as she herself would say, the only person in this family who has ever had any sense. I thought about calling my best friend, Tanya, who would immediately say something that would make me feel like I was allowed to be furious. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about all of these things, and then I sat still. I needed to know everything before I did anything. I spent the next 4 days collecting information the way you collect evidence, quietly, methodically, without letting anyone know I was doing it. I pulled my credit report. I checked every account I had. I called the DMV. I called 2 other financial institutions where I'd had accounts in the past. I called my landlord. What I found was worse than the savings account. A credit card had been opened in my name 18 months ago. The balance was $7,200. The billing address was my parents' house in Dayton. Every charge on it was traceable to Derek. Gas stations near his apartment in Akron. A furniture store. A string of transactions at a restaurant supply company that I later learned was connected to a business he had tried to start and quietly abandoned. There was also a personal loan application in my name that had been denied, which meant someone had tried to borrow $15,000 using my credit and my income information and had been turned down, likely because the credit card debt had already dinged my score. My floor was gone. My credit was damaged. And somewhere in Dayton, my parents had apparently decided that the responsible daughter was a resource to be drawn down when needed. I went to see Grandma Ruth on a Thursday evening. I brought her the almond pound cake she liked from the bakery on 5th, and I sat at her kitchen table and I put the documents in front of her and I told her everything. She didn't say a word until I finished. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are going to call an attorney tomorrow morning. Not next week, tomorrow." I nodded. "And you are not going to call your mother first," she said. "I know that's what you want to do. I know you want to give her the chance to explain. There is no explanation that fixes this. You call the attorney first." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I will tell you that the feeling of that, the simple weight of it, the certainty, was the first moment since Tuesday in which I felt like the ground still existed somewhere beneath me. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I want you to hear that." I had not realized until she said it how much I had been waiting for someone to say it. I called the attorney the next morning. Her name was Monica, and she came recommended by a colleague at work who had been through a messy estate situation a few years earlier. I sat in her office on a Friday afternoon and I laid out everything: the forged POA, the withdrawals, the credit card, the loan application. And I watched her expression move through several careful adjustments. She told me what I was looking at: forgery, identity theft, unauthorized use of credit, depending on what my mother and possibly my father and brother had known and when, potentially wire fraud and conspiracy. She said the word criminal and I felt it land somewhere behind my sternum. She also told me something that I had not considered. She said that because the POA had been filed with the bank, there would be a paper trail the bank was obligated to preserve. She said that because the credit card charges were documented and largely traceable, Building a case would be more straightforward than these situations often were. She said I'd been smart to gather everything before making contact with my family. I asked her what my options were. She said I had several, and she walked me through them. I could pursue civil recovery. I could file a criminal complaint. I could do both. I could also, she noted, do nothing. But she said it in a tone that made clear she did not consider that a real option. I told her I needed a few days. I did not contact my parents during those days. I went to work. I ate dinner. I talked to Tanya, who said the things I needed to hear. I went to see Grandma Ruth again, and we watched an old movie, and she made tea, and we didn't talk about any of it, and that was exactly right. On a Wednesday evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I made a list of every single thing I wanted from this situation. Not what I expected, not what I thought was realistic, but what I actually wanted. I wrote for almost an hour. When I looked at the list, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Near the bottom, in my own handwriting, I had written, I want them to understand that I am not their safety net. I was never their safety net. I was their daughter. I looked at that for a long time. Then I called Monica and told her we were moving forward. The criminal complaint came first. I filed it with the Columbus PD, who coordinated with the Dayton PD given my parents' address. I will not pretend this was easy. Standing at a counter and saying out loud that I was filing charges against my mother for forgery is a sentence I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. And it still felt like swallowing glass. The civil filing followed. Monica moved quickly, and a freeze was placed on my parents' joint assets while the case was evaluated. The bank, faced with documentation of a forged authorization instrument, opened their own internal review, and this was the part that still floors me when I think about it. A manager there called me personally to tell me that the fraudulent transactions would be reversed as part of their fraud resolution process. Not all of it immediately, and there would be a process, but I was going to get my money back. I found out later, through the attorney, that when the detective assigned to the case contacted my mother, she said that I had given verbal permission, that she hadn't thought I would mind, since it was for the family. That she had meant to tell me, but there had never been a good time. My father said he hadn't known anything about it. Derek, when reached by investigators, said he had been told the money was a loan my mother was coordinating on his behalf. He said he hadn't known where the money came from. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. The investigators were going to figure that out, and it was no longer my job to make excuses for any of them. What I want to tell you about the day I drove to Dayton is that I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in my parking lot for 20 minutes first, hand on the key, not turning it. I thought about all the ways the people in my family had taught me that keeping the peace was my responsibility, that being the forgiving one, the patient one, the one who didn't make things awkward at Christmas. That was my role, and if I played it well enough, maybe everything would be okay. I thought about how long I had played that role. Then I turned the key and I drove. My parents were home. My father answered the door, and I watched the expressions move across his face in quick succession. Surprise, then something that wanted to look like warmth, then a flicker of something else underneath. My mother appeared behind him in the hallway, and she looked the way she always looked when she didn't know how much trouble she was in. Careful, slightly performative, waiting to see which version of events was going to be required. I did not go inside. I handed my father the envelope. It contained formal written notification that a civil action had been filed, a copy of the fraud report, written revocation of any and all financial or legal instruments bearing my name that I had not personally signed in the presence of a notary, and a letter I had written myself, not to be legal, just to be said. The letter said that I'd spent my life being the responsible one, and I'd confused responsibility with availability, and I was done being available for this. It said I knew what had been done, and I knew why, and the why was the part that hurt most. Not the money, not the credit, but the idea that the people who were supposed to love me had looked at everything I had built by myself and decided it was there for them to take. It said I was not doing this to punish them. I was doing this because I had finally figured out that protecting myself and loving my family were not the same obligation, and I had spent 31 years acting like they were, and I was finished. My mother said my name. Just that, Claire, in a voice I hadn't heard her use before, something quieter and more real than her usual register. I said, I hope you read all of it. Then I walked back to my car. Grandma Ruth was waiting for me at her apartment. She had made the almond pound cake this time, and she had a pot of coffee going. And when I walked through her door, she looked at my face and said, You did it. I did it, I said. We sat at her kitchen table until almost midnight, and she told me things about my parents that she had never told me before. not to excuse them, but to explain them, which is different. She told me about the way my father had been raised and the ways that had shaped him, and about my mother's own hunger for approval that had gotten displaced somewhere along the way. She didn't tell me to forgive them. She didn't tell me any of the things people say when they want you to make peace for their comfort. She just talked to me like I was someone worth telling the truth to. I drove home at midnight through streets that were mostly empty, and I remember the feeling in my chest. Not happy, exactly. Not light, but something more load-bearing than that. Something like the sensation of a foundation setting. In the months that followed, the legal process moved on its own track, and I tried to stay out of its way. My mother accepted a plea arrangement that included restitution, a fine, and probation. The criminal record was real and it was documented, and it belonged to her now, not to me. The civil case was settled before it went to trial. Between the bank's fraud resolution and the civil settlement, I recovered just under 90% of what had been taken. Monica told me that was a better outcome than most. Derek called me once about 4 months in. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known the full extent of it. He said he hoped we could talk sometime. I listened to the message twice and then I deleted it, not from anger, but from a clear-eyed recognition that I didn't have anything to say to him yet, and maybe I wouldn't for a long time, and that was allowed. My father has not contacted me. I moved into a new apartment in April, 1 floor up. Better light, a balcony I like to sit on in the evenings. I started contributing to my savings account again the month after the first restitution payment came through. The balance is growing again, slower than before but steady, and I look at it differently now. It was always my floor, but now I understand more precisely what I was building it against, and I think that knowledge is a kind of protection too. Grandma Ruth came over for dinner last month, and I made the roast chicken she taught me to make years ago, and we ate at my kitchen table, and she told me I needed more plants in the apartment, which I think is her version of saying she's proud of me. I read something once about learned helplessness, the psychological pattern where a person who has experienced repeated situations in which they had no control eventually stops trying to change outcomes, even when change becomes possible. I think about that in relation to the girl I was before March of last year, the one who had organized her entire emotional life around not needing anything from anyone, around being so self-sufficient that no one could use her dependence against her. I had thought that was strength. I understand now it was just a more sophisticated form of the same pattern, still organizing myself around what my family needed, just in the negative instead of the positive. Real self-sufficiency, I've learned, isn't about needing nothing. It's about knowing that when something is taken from you, you have the capacity to name it and find it and go get it back. I know that now. There's a woman in my office named Dana who has been going through something with her own family. She hasn't told me the details, but I've seen the look. She came to me last week and asked, without quite asking, how I had gotten through it. We were standing by the coffee machine and I thought about everything I could say. I told her, the first step is the hardest one, but it's also the only one you have to decide to take. The rest of them follow from it. Once you decide that you are worth protecting, the path becomes clearer. Not easier, but clear. And clear is enough. Clear is more than enough to work with. She nodded and I could see her turning it over. I went back to my desk and I looked out the window for a minute at the Columbus skyline. Nothing dramatic, just buildings and sky and a morning that was going about its ordinary business. I thought, I'm 31 years old. I have a floor under my feet that I built myself and then rebuilt when someone tried to take it. I have a grandmother who saves me a seat at our kitchen table and tells me the truth. I have a friend who knows me well enough to say the right thing. I have a balcony and the beginning of more plants per instructions. I have enough. If you have spent your life being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who never asks for anything and tries not to need anything, I want you to hear this. The people who love you will not love you less if you take up space. And the ones who do love you less for it, that information is also valuable. That information is, in fact, the most important thing they will ever tell you. You are not a resource. You are not a safety net. You are not contingent on their needs or their comfort, or their ability to treat you the way you deserve. You are the main character of your own life. Go act like it.